There is a specific kind of silence that does not feel like quiet. It feels like erasure. I pushed open my front door on a Tuesday afternoon in October, and the silence hit me before I even stepped inside. No furniture, no photographs, no curtains, no dishes, no trace that a life had ever been lived in that space. Just bare hardwood floors and afternoon light and the sound of my own breathing bouncing off empty walls. My house was gone. Not robbed, not foreclosed, gone with paperwork and notary stamps and signatures, and the people whose names were on those documents were not strangers. They were my mother and my father. They did not call it what it was. They called it family. I want you to stay with me, because by the time this story ends, you will understand exactly how a family can take everything you built. I'll look you in the eye while they do it and call it love, and you will understand what I did about it. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly, the way the strong one does everything, except this time the quiet was mine, and it cost them everything. Before we get there, I need to tell you about the dinner, the Sunday dinner where it all began, because what happened at that table was not what it looked like, and what they did not tell me that evening, what they had been doing for 4 months before they ever sat me down, is the part that changed everything. Hold 3 questions in your mind as we move through this story. First, how does a family take the most significant thing a woman has ever built without a single threat, without raising a single hand, using nothing but love as the weapon? Second, how does an intelligent, self-aware woman not see it happening until it is already done? And what does that reveal about what family conditioning is truly capable of doing to a person's mind? And third, the question I want you to hold closest: when the strong one finally stops being available, what happens to the family that built itself around her? You will have all 3 answers before this story is over. But I have to warn you, they are not comfortable answers. They were not comfortable for me. Let us start at the beginning. Let us start with the family I spent 36 years giving everything to. My name is not important for this story. I grew up outside of Charlotte, North Carolina, on a street where everybody knew everybody and nobody locked their doors before 10 at night. The kind of neighborhood where your mother heard about something you did before you made it home. My mother's name was Brenda. My father's name was Bernard. And my brother, 3 years younger than me, the one at the center of everything that eventually happened, his name was Terrell. Brenda was the kind of woman who held a room without trying. First one at the church when someone passed. Last one to leave after a repast. She cooked like it was a calling. Sunday dinners were not optional, they were sacred. Extended family, neighbors, whoever needed a plate. She had a gift for making people feel held. She was also, as I would understand much later, a woman who had learned to manage the people she loved rather than simply love them. There is a difference between those 2 things. It took me 36 years to see it clearly. Bernard was quieter. He had worked for the county for over 2 decades, sang baritone in the choir every Sunday without fail, and when he spoke in a serious moment, the room settled before he finished his first sentence. His voice carried a weight you felt in your body before your mind had time to process it. I did not understand, for most of my life, how much of my own decision-making had been shaped by that response. And then there was Terrell. Terrell was magnetic in a way that was entirely real and entirely effortless. He could warm up a room of strangers in 4 minutes. He had big ideas, the kind that make you want to believe in them. He also had something else, something our family had given him so consistently and for so long that he had stopped being able to function without it. A guarantee. The guarantee that no matter how far he fell, the family would always catch him before he hit the ground. Every single time. By the time we were adults, that guarantee had cost the family more than I knew, more than I was ever allowed to know. But the real cost, the one nobody had put on any ledger, was about to come due, and it was going to come due on me. I bought my house in 2015. I was 33 years old, and I had saved for 10 years to do it. 10 years of driving the same car past the point of dignity, skipping girls' trips, packing lunch every single day, living with a roommate until I was 30 because every extra dollar went into the one account I never touched. That house was a 3-bedroom brick ranch in East Charlotte with a covered front porch and a backyard with real soil and space for the garden I had been dreaming about since I was a girl, watching Brenda grow tomatoes behind our childhood home. I want you to understand what that house was to me. Not an investment. Evidence. Proof that the woman who had spent her whole life being the one who asked for nothing, who made herself small so the room stayed manageable, that woman had built something real. Something with her name on it. Something that could not be taken back. I used to sit on that front porch on Sunday mornings before church with my coffee and just exist inside the fact of it. I had built something. It was mine. I did not know on those Sunday mornings that a conversation was already happening about my house. A conversation that had been going on for 4 months. A conversation I had not been invited to and would not be told about until it was already too late to stop it. Terrell's second business failed in early 2018. A catering operation he had built with a partner from the neighborhood. I had believed in it. I had prayed over it. I had shown up at his first big event and felt something warm moving through me watching my brother work a room the way only he could. Then the partnership collapsed, and by spring of 2018, Terrell was carrying a number that Brenda and Bernard could not cover from their savings. I know all of this now. I assembled it afterward, the way you reconstruct something after it has already been destroyed. Not to restore it, but to finally understand what it was. What I received at the time was not a conversation. What I received was a phone call from Brenda on a Thursday evening, her voice warm, easy. She missed me. It had been too long. She was making my favorites. Come to Sunday dinner. I said, of course. I drove to my parents' house with music on and the windows down because May in Charlotte is the kind of warm that still feels like a gift, and I remember feeling genuinely glad to be going home. Brenda had set the table with the good dishes, the ones that only came out for Thanksgiving and funerals and moments that required the family to look like itself at its best. Candles, pressed cloth napkins. Terrell was already there. He looked tired in a way that sat deeper than just a hard week, but I moved through the evening the way you do when the surface looks fine. Bernard said, "Grace." Brenda served. We talked about cousins, the church anniversary, a neighbor's health. The ease of it. The specific ease of a family dinner where everything feels like it is supposed to feel. They waited until Brenda brought out the peach cobbler. Bernard leaned forward. He said my name with that weight. He told me Terrell was in serious trouble. He used the word catastrophic. My father did not reach for dramatic language. When he used that word, my whole body recalibrated. He said they had been working the problem for months. They had not come to this lightly, and then he told me what they needed. They needed me to sign my house over as collateral so Terrell could secure new financing to settle the debt and get back on solid ground. Temporary, they said. Everything released once he's stabilized. And then Brenda reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. The hands that had braided my hair and wiped my face and passed me a plate every Sunday for 33 years. And she said, "Baby, we would never ask if we had any other choice. You have always been the strong one. God made you strong for a reason." And there it was. The sentence I had been hearing my entire life in 100 different forms, dressed as a blessing, used as a lever. I did not say yes, but I did not say no. I asked for time. Brenda smiled and said, "Of course, baby. Take all the time you need." I drove home through the May dark with something cold and still sitting in the center of my chest. What I did not know, what they had not told me, was that my name had already been in conversations with the lender for 4 months. They had not come to that table to ask me. They had come to confirm me. And there is a difference between those two things that I will spend the rest of this story explaining. Because what I found when I started looking at the documents, after everything was already gone, was not just a betrayal. It was a system that had been running on me my entire life. And the house was not where it started. The house was just where it finally became impossible to hide. Before we go further, if this story is touching something real in you right now, Let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming stories. Because what I am about to show you is not just my story. It is a pattern. And once you see it, you will start recognizing it everywhere. Now, the 6 months between that Sunday dinner and the day I came home to an empty house. This is the part most people skip. Everyone wants the revelation, but the revelation only lands if you understand what came before it. Because what happened to me did not happen in one dramatic moment. It happened in increments, slowly, carefully, in the space between one phone call and the next. And I am going to show it to you step by step, because this is the part that will save someone watching this right now. Phase 1 was information control. In the weeks after the dinner, I was given information about Terrell's situation in carefully measured portions. The crisis was always slightly worse than the last update. The timeline always slightly more urgent. The details always just vague enough that I could not push back on specifics, but heavy enough that the emergency always felt real and pressing and impossible to ignore. My information environment was being shaped without my knowledge. I was being managed toward a decision that had already been made before I was ever invited to the table. Phase 2 is the one that will stop some of you cold, because it did not come from my parents. It came from the people I trusted most outside of them. Phase 2 was community pressure, and in a Black Southern family with deep church roots, this phase has a specific weight I need to name directly. Within weeks of that dinner, people began reaching out. An aunt called to check on me, and the conversation drifted naturally toward Terrell and how hard things were. A woman from the church who had known my family for 30 years called to say she was praying for all of us. An older cousin sent me a scripture about bearing one another's burdens. None of these people knew they were being used. I believe that completely. But in a community where the social fabric is that tightly woven, where everyone knows your family and everyone is watching how you handle hardship, the pressure of that network is not subtle. It is total. And it is all saying the same thing in different voices. You do not let your own go under. To hold back is not caution. It is a character failure. Phase 3 was the most damaging and the most invisible while it was happening. Every time I asked a hard question about the legal terms, about what happened if the financing failed, about what collateral actually meant in a worst-case scenario, my questions were not answered. They were redirected. I cannot believe you are treating your brother like a business transaction. Your daddy has not slept right in 2 months. I did not raise you to turn your back on this family. That is not who we are. Not one of those sentences answered my question. But every one of them made me ashamed of having asked. And once shame enters the room, reason leaves it. Because shame does not live in the thinking brain. It lives in the belonging brain. And for a Black woman raised in the church, raised in community, raised to understand that your character is visible in how you treat your family, shame is not a feeling. It is a full-body verdict. By month 4, I had stopped asking questions. Not because I had answers, because I had been made to feel that asking was itself a form of betrayal. That is the exact moment a pattern wins. When the person inside it stops trusting her own questions. In month 5, they brought a notary to my house. They said it was just a formality. I had been worn down for 5 months. I signed. 6 weeks later, Terrell's financing fell through. The lender called the collateral. My parents did not have the money to cover it, and so they sold my house. Brenda called me on a Tuesday. She cried through most of it. And when the crying slowed, she said, "We did what we had to do. That is what family does." I hung up. I sat very still, and something that had been holding a version of my life together quietly, completely, broke. But here is what I did not do next. I did not call them back. I did not absorb it the way I had absorbed everything else. What I chose to do instead is what changed everything. And what I found when I started looking is going to reframe everything you think you know about how this story ends. I pulled every document, Every piece of paper I had signed, every email thread I had access to, every record connected to the arrangement. I spread them across the kitchen table of the apartment I was now renting, smaller than the house, quieter than the house. Nothing on the walls yet because I had not been able to make it feel like home. And I read everything with the kind of attention I had not brought to any of it when I was still inside the pressure of those 6 months. Almost immediately I found it. The thing nobody had told me. The preliminary conversations with the lender had started 4 months before the Sunday dinner. 4 months before Brenda set the good dishes out and made the peach cobbler and took my hand and told me God made me strong for a reason. My name had been in those conversations for 4 months. Like I was not the last option they had found in a desperate moment. I had been the plan. From the beginning, they had needed the right moment and the right emotional conditions to bring me to a table where the decision had already been made, and get me to call it my choice. There is a specific kind of pain that comes from learning you were not failed by accident. Accident is survivable. It means the people you love made a catastrophic mistake in a moment of panic, and you were caught in the wreckage. But premeditation, even the soft, love-driven premeditation of a family trying to save one of its members, means something different. It means there was a room, and in that room, your name came up, and a decision was made. And then you were managed carefully over months until the decision that had already been made looked like something you had chosen. That is not a mistake. That is a system. And I had been living inside that system my entire life without ever having a name for it. I started therapy 6 weeks after Brenda's call. My therapist asked me in our 3rd session when I could first remember being called the strong one. I assumed I would give her a high school story. What came out was a memory from when I was 7 years old. Terrell had broken one of Brenda's good serving bowls, the kind that only came out for company. The reaction in the house was enormous. Brenda's distress, Bernard's controlled silence, the tension filling every room. And I remember making myself very small, very still, because I already understood, at 7 years old, that my safety in that house required me to not add to the noise, to be the one who did not need anything. My therapist looked at me after I finished and said, "You have been managing this family's emotional economy since you were a child. You have just been paying in different currencies." I did not speak for a long time, because she was right, and because the currencies I still had to account for, the ones nobody had collected yet, were about to change hands for the last time. Terrell called me 3 months after the house was sold. I almost did not answer, but something made me pick up. He sounded stripped, quiet in a way Terrell had never been quiet in his life. He had found out the truth. Not Brenda and Bernard's version, which was that I had agreed, that I had wanted to help, that this had been my choice. The actual truth, the 4-month timeline, the lender conversations, the way I had been managed rather than asked. He said when he found out he had confronted our parents, and I asked him what they said. They said I had agreed. They said I was happy to help. They said it was what I wanted. He had believed them at first. And then he had started asking questions that did not hold up. And so he had called me. We talked for 6 hours. 6 hours. Well, we said things that had never been said between us in over 3 decades of being in the same family. Terrell told me what it felt like to be the one who was always caught. He said, "Every time they saved me, I felt a little less like a man. Like I was something to be managed, not somebody they actually saw." He said every rescue had cost him something our parents never put on any ledger, his belief in his own ability to stand. The rescues were real. The love was real. And they had still taken something from him that money could not give back. And I told him about the silence, about what it costs to spend your entire adult life making yourself small enough that the family can keep functioning, about the house, about signing those papers, about the documents. We cried. 2 people in their 30s on the phone past midnight. I ain't crying about things that began when we were small enough to be held. And then Terrell said something I have thought about every day since. He said, "I think the pattern needed both of us. It needed me to keep falling so it could keep using you to catch me. and neither of us ever got to just be a person. I need to address the question I know some of you are holding right now. Are Brenda and Bernard villains? Did they plan this deliberately? Because the answer to that question is the most important part of this entire story. And it is not the answer most people expect. My parents are people who inherited a pattern they did not create. Bernard grew up where survival meant closing ranks and asking questions later. Brenda had been holding her family together since girlhood before she ever had a family of her own. They did not sit at a table and decide to take from me. They convinced themselves at every step that what they were doing was love, that asking the capable one to carry more was honoring her, not harming her. They were wrong, deeply wrong. But they were wrong from inside a story handed to them long before I was born. The tragedy of these patterns is not that cruel people keep them alive. It is that loving people do, people who simply never learned to question the water they were swimming in. And the water was about to run dry. I prepared for 2 months. Not because I needed rehearsal, because I needed to be certain I was walking into that room as the woman I was choosing to become. Not the strong one with her feelings already managed. Not the daughter who makes herself smaller so nobody feels uncomfortable. Just the woman who knew what she knew and was going to say it plainly. On a Saturday afternoon in the fall, I sat across from Brenda and Bernard in the living room of my childhood home. The same room where we had celebrated birthdays and held hands before Christmas dinner and watched New Year's come in together every year of my life. I talked for 25 minutes without stopping. The 4-month timeline. The lender conversations that preceded the dinner. The managed information. The way my questions had been reframed as disloyalty rather than answered. The way I had been brought to that table already decided on. I told them about therapy, about family systems, about what the pattern had cost me and what it had cost Terrell in ways nobody had ever accounted for. And when I finished, the room was completely quiet. Bernard looked at his hands. Brenda, my mother, who had not been without the right words for anything in her entire life, said nothing for a long time. The silence stretched, and I did not move toward it. I did not fill it. I did not reach for her the way I had always reached, softening what was hard, absorbing what was uncomfortable, making the room easier at the cost of my own truth. I sat with my hands on my lap and let the silence exist. And in the stillness of not moving, something in me shifted. Something that had been braced for most of my adult life quietly put itself down. Brenda spoke first. She said, "We did what we had to do to keep this family together." And I said, "At the cost of mine." She started to cry. I watched myself not stand up, not cross the room, not put my arms around her and make it easier for her to carry what she had done. I had done that my entire life. Not today. Bernard spoke after a long silence. 3 words. We were wrong. Something in my body released when he said that. Real and physical, the kind of release that comes from putting down something you have been carrying so long you forgot you were holding it. And then a newer, quieter part of me simply observed, these are words. Watch what comes after the words, because I had learned by then that patterns do not break on acknowledgement. They break on what follows it, on what a person chooses on every ordinary day after the moment of recognition. I told them I needed something different from what we had always done. Not punishment, accountability with legs, change that showed up in behavior, not just in tears at a living room table. And then I told them the other thing. The thing I had been quietly preparing while I sat across from them. The thing I had decided before I ever walked through that door. I want to tell you about the revenge, because I know you have been waiting for it. And I need you to understand why it looked nothing like what they expected, and everything like what I needed. There was no scene, no explosion, no moment where I stood up and told Brenda's church friends what had happened, no public reckoning, no dramatic exit with doors slamming. What I did was quieter than any of that, and far more permanent. I removed myself, completely, methodically, without announcement and without apology. I want you to understand what that actually meant in practical terms. Because this is not just an emotional decision. This was a structural dismantling. For the first time in my adult life, I stopped being financially available to my family in any form. The small loans that never got repaid, done. The covering of gaps when money ran short at the end of the month, done. The emergency calls I always answered because I was the one who always had something to give, done. I changed what I shared about my finances. I stopped discussing my income, my savings, my plans. Information I had always offered freely, because in that family, transparency from me had always been a form of making myself available to be drawn on. That information became private. Mine, not theirs. I stopped attending events where my presence had functioned as emotional labor rather than genuine connection. The Sunday dinners where I had always been the one to keep things smooth, to absorb the tension, to make sure everyone left feeling fine. I stopped going. Not forever. But until I could walk into that house as a person, rather than as a function. And here is what I want you to understand about what happened when I stopped. The family did not fall apart. Terrell did not collapse. Brenda did not stop functioning. What happened was far more revealing than any of that. What happened was that everyone who had been running on my availability, quietly, invisibly for decades, had to find another way. Had to look at themselves, had to sit inside the discomfort that I had always moved in to dissolve before it could fully land. My absence did not destroy the family. It held up a mirror. And what they saw in that mirror, what each of them had to confront once I was no longer there to buffer the reflection, was their own part in what had been running. That is not a small thing. That is everything. The calls still came at first, Brenda calling to say she missed me. Bernard leaving voicemails with that voice I had been trained since childhood to respond to. Terrell asking when things were going to go back to normal. And I listened to every single one of those messages. I did not ignore them. I did not pretend they did not exist. I sat with them. And then I responded, in my own time, on my own terms, from a place of clarity rather than conditioning, not cold, not punishing, simply no longer available in the ways I had always been available before. And that difference, that single, quiet, permanent difference, was the most powerful thing I had ever done in my life. I do not have my house back. This is not that kind of story. What I have instead is something that took me a long time to recognize as its own kind of wealth. I have my own account of my own life, for the first time. Not my family's version of me, my own account, the true one, where I am a full person with needs and limits and a pattern I was born into that cost me more than any dollar amount can measure, and the clarity to make sure it never collects from me again. Terrell and I talk every week. He is in therapy. He is building slowly, without a net, finding out what he is made of when nobody moves in to stop the fall. I am proud of him the way you are proud of someone doing the genuinely hard thing in private, with no applause because it is the right thing to do. My relationship with Brenda and Bernard is different now. A present but redefined. They have access to me, but not to my resources, not to my availability, not to the version of me that existed to keep the family system running. What they have access to is the actual me, and that is a smaller offer than what I used to give. But it is the only honest one I have. Here is what I know about patterns after all of it. They are not chosen. They are learned. And what is learned can, with enough honesty and enough time and the right support, be unlearned. But not in silence, not by keeping the peace, not by continuing to be the strong one in a system that has always mistaken your strength for permission. The strong one pays, until the day she decides she is done paying. My parents sold my house. They called it family. I called it the last pattern I would ever ignore. And then I did something they never saw coming from the woman they had spent 36 years counting on. I stopped. Quietly, completely, permanently. And I used every ounce of energy I had been spending on that family's economy to build something new. Something that belonged entirely to me. They called it distance. I called it the beginning of my actual life. Before I go, I want to ask you something real. In your own family, the one you grew up in or the one you are living inside right now, what role were you assigned? Not the one you chose, the one that was already waiting for you when you arrived. The strong one, the one who holds it all together, the peacekeeper, the one everyone assumes is fine because fine is what she was trained to perform, the one who never gets to be the emergency. Think about the last time someone in your family checked on you, not to ask something, not to pull you into someone else's crisis, but simply to ask how you were doing and then wait long enough to actually hear the answer. And here is the harder question. What have you been paying for that role? Not in one large visible payment, in the 1,000 quiet ones. The Sunday dinners where you kept something to yourself, the calls you answered when you had nothing left, the needs you did not name because naming them felt like a luxury the family could not afford. The houses, literal or otherwise, you let go of because someone else's need was always louder than yours. I am not asking you to be angry. I am asking you to look, clearly, honestly, at what has been running inside your family's walls and inside you for longer than you have allowed yourself to admit. Because that is where it starts, right there, in the looking. And here is what I want to leave you with. The thing I wish someone had told me before the house was gone. The strong one stopping is not abandonment. It is not cruelty. It is not a failure of love. It is the moment a woman decides that the love she has been giving out so freely, for so long, to so many, at such enormous cost to herself, finally deserves a new address. And that address is her. Hold on to that. Drop a comment and tell me, what role did your family assign you? The strong one, the responsible one, the one who was always expected to give more than was ever given back. Or tell me about the moment you stopped, what it felt like, what it cost, what it gave you. This channel exists because these stories deserve to be told honestly, with depth, with the kind of quiet that makes you feel less alone at 2 a.m. when you are sitting with something you have carried too long without a name for it. If this story reached you, please share it with someone who needed to hear it today. Subscribe so the next story finds you when it is time. Thank you for being here. Thank you for letting someone else's truth sit next to your own for a little while. Thank you for being the kind of person who stays until the end. That is not a small thing. That is, in fact, the whole thing. Stay quiet, stay aware, break the pattern. Every story on this channel is built from truth, the kind of truth that lives in patterns, not in names. The characters you met today are composites. The pain they carried is not. If something in this story found you, that was not an accident. Take care of yourself. And if you need more than a story can give, please reach out to someone who can hold it with you.